Imagine Hollywood's quintessential tough guy entering a studio of daytime TV hosts, believing they could shake him. Prepare to witness something nobody in that room expected. Now, the important question is, what happens when calm meets confrontation? Clint Eastwood, the man who can silence chaos with a single look, walked onto the set, appearing ready for what seemed like a standard appearance. What transpired quickly escalated into something far more intense. The cameras were already rolling. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the legendary Clint Eastwood, Whoopi Goldberg announced, her warm voice carrying over the roar of applause. Eastwood gave a polite nod and settled into his chair, his calm presence instantly filling the space. His hands were placed squarely on the armrests, his posture exuding a quiet authority. "Thank you for having me," he said, his deep, gravelly voice resonating in the studio. The segment began as any other. "So, Clint," Whoopi continued, maintaining a relaxed demeanor, "tell us about your latest project. What was it that drew you to this story?" "Well," Eastwood responded thoughtfully, "it's a story about second chances. Sometimes, people deserve a second shot at redemption, even when the world has already decided what it thinks about them. A powerful message, but would it remain so simple?" Sarah Haynes leaned forward, her interest piqued. "That's such a beautiful sentiment. At this stage of your career, how do you choose which stories to tell?" "I look for truth," Eastwood stated without hesitation. "Stories that say something genuine about being human. There's already enough make-believe floating around." For a few moments, the conversation flowed with ease. The audience hung on Eastwood's every word as he spoke about directing, narrative, and working with performers, drawing on decades of experience. But not everyone at the table was content with the tranquil atmosphere. And that's when things took a sharp turn. Joy Behar, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, leaned forward, a subtle smile on her face, as if poised to strike at the perfect moment. "Clint," she began, her voice suddenly tinged with an edge, "can I ask you something?" The atmosphere in the studio shifted instantaneously. "Certainly," Eastwood replied, his gaze turning to Joy. "You speak of truth and redemption," Joy continued, "but do you not find your political associations at times to be somewhat at odds with those values? A beat of silence, the kind of silence that makes you hold your breath, wondering what's next." Whoopi glanced quickly at Joy, a silent admonition, but the question had already been posed. Eastwood's eyes narrowed slightly as he replied, his voice even and controlled. "What associations specifically are you referring to?" "Oh, you know," Joy responded, a saccharine tone that didn't quite mask the bite. "Your endorsements of certain politicians, some of whom have expressed what many consider controversial views on women and minorities." The studio went completely silent. Eastwood's voice remained calm, unhurried. "I've never made any statements that expressed disrespect towards women or minorities," he stated evenly. But Joy pressed on. "Perhaps not directly," she conceded. "But don't your endorsements suggest a certain affiliation?" The tension in the air was palpable. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably. This was clearly not part of the planned interview. Then Eastwood leaned back, fixing Joy with a gaze that seemed to be plucked directly from one of his films. "I've been in this business longer than you've been alive," he said, his tone quiet. "I've worked with people from all walks of life and all walks of belief. My measure of a person is based on their character, not their political beliefs." That line landed like a heavyweight punch. Joy's face tightened. I beg your pardon. I have every right to pose difficult questions. And I, Eastwood retorted without missing a beat, have every right to not entertain questions designed to provoke controversy rather than conversation. The air in the room felt significantly cooler. This isn't about controversy, Joy insisted, her voice sharper now. This is about journalism. Eastwood let out a soft, knowing chuckle. Is that what we're calling it these days? Where I come from, journalism meant presenting facts, not trying to bait people into saying things. The tension was now almost unbearable. Whoopi leaned forward, ready to intervene, but the exchange had already taken on a momentum of its own. And the real question now was, had the lines been crossed, or was this just the beginning? Stick with me, because what followed next took this already charged conversation to an entirely new level. This was no longer merely an interview. It had transformed into something entirely different. And when it was all over, the people in that studio would never view the situation the same way again. Things were just getting good. Not for long, though. Whoopi came forward to attempt to regain control. Let's maybe get back to talking about your film, Clint. But nobody seemed to have forgotten yet. Joy said, shaking her head. No, I think that matters. You don't come on television and expect to have friendly questions after controversial political comments. And just like that, tension snapped right back. Eastwood did not raise his voice. He did not cut her off. But there was something in his eyes, something sharp and distinct to veteran Eastwood fans, something chilling and undeniably his. Well, Eastwood said, go ahead. Joy came forward again, sensing a shift. There was that empty chair moment, she said with a smirk, remembering when he did a political appearance for some event. You remember that? The room felt the tremor. You mean when I used a creative metaphor to talk about accountability? Eastwood said smoothly. I do remember that. I don't know what you are talking about. Joy cocked her head in response. Didn't that seem unstable? Silence. The kind that eats the corners of the room. The crew had stopped. And then Eastwood leaned forward. Only a little. His voice was lower than before, but carried more weight. Joy, he said, let me ask you something. Joy blinked. What? How many films have you made? The question hung in the air. What's that got to do with it? She shot back. Answer it, Eastwood said. A beat. I am a host and a comedian, Joy said. Right. He nodded. And how many Academy Awards do you have? Her voice got sharper. That's not relevant. He did not stop. How many lives have you been instrumental in building? He asked. How many young actors got their start because you gave them a shot? How many stories have you told that people carried with them? The pressure was back on. All of it. I entertain people every day in this show, Joy said, though there was a subtle change in her tone, and her earlier boldness began to fade slightly. Do you? Eastwood asked, not offensively, but with honest consideration, because that question was sharper than any accusation. From where I'm sitting, it appears as though you try to make guests uncomfortable in an attempt to be sensational for clips. Is that your definition of entertainment? The room grew tighter. You could feel it. Sarah Haynes quickly jumped in to change the topic. Clint, your films have reached so many people all over the world. What has been the most rewarding thing you've accomplished? It seemed to be a saving grace. Eastwood, however, had more to say. You know what, Sarah, he said. I'm going to tell you. Another beat. The most rewarding thing I have accomplished is working with professionals who understand that respect must be earned, not demanded. His words were quiet and deliberate, but the implication was clear. People who do not feel the need to stand behind the camera and take cheap shots at others. Joy's face instantly fell. Cheap shots? I'm asking legitimate questions about your beliefs. No, Eastwood said without even a hint of falter in his voice. You are staging moments for sensationalization and a viral clip. Am I incorrect? The room was now tense and charged. There is a difference, he said, between a request to discuss your perspective and a setup for disaster. I am not setting anyone up, Joy insisted. I am a television host. You are supposed to talk to guests about why they are here, Eastwood said. And then he finally made it clear. I came here to discuss the story of a film, a story of a man who made a lot of mistakes, but who wants to try and better himself. He paused for dramatic effect. Sometimes the only things in our way are the people who refuse to let us outrun who we used to be. Everyone in the room got it. Not one person, even Joy, missed the point. Sarah Haynes quickly gave her head a swift nod of approval. That's a powerful statement. But the real question now was, had they finally turned the corner, or were they just building up to something that would blow everyone away? Because what came next left the room utterly speechless. The calm seemed like a lull in the storm, but it was actually the prelude to an even greater tempest. Redemption is one heck of a theme, Sarah said, trying to diffuse the volatile situation. But Joy was not done. Speaking of redemption, she butted in, some people are a little beyond it, wouldn't you say? When some people continue to condone extreme politics, at what point do we just write them off? And there it was again. The turn. The tension. The boundary was not just being pushed, it was being completely obliterated. Eastwood's jaw tightened just a hair. Are we talking about the character in my movie, or are you turning this personal again? I'm talking about accountability, Joy replied in a tone that could only be described as sanctimonious. Public figures have a responsibility to their viewers. Silence hung heavy in the air. Eastwood's voice was softer now, but considerably more biting. Do they? He let out another beat before dropping his final bomb. And what responsibility do TV hosts have to their guests? The words landed like a punch. To ask tough questions, Joy retorted without blinking. The important questions. No, Eastwood said. To treat them with basic human dignity. A beat of silence. Which you seem to have long forgotten. The room buzzed with a palpable tension, and all the hosts were darting nervous glances at each other, sensing that this was no longer just an interview. Joy was not backing down. Human dignity? Really? That's a funny thing coming from a man who made his career by acting in violent films and glorifying gun culture. A wave of gasps rippled through the audience. This was definitely not what anyone was expecting for live television. Eastwood leaned back and regarded her, his gaze unnervingly steady. He was not rising to the bait, but was carefully observing her every move. Finally, he opened his mouth. You know, you have one major problem, Joy. I'm all ears, she replied with a cynical sneer. You think being loud means you're right. You think being aggressive means you're brave. A moment passed before he concluded, You're just a bully behind a microphone. His words hit Joy like a ton of bricks. Excuse me? She blurted out, her voice piercing the silence. You heard me, Eastwood said, his voice still surprisingly level. Every single day you attack people who have to answer all of your aggressive questions, all while their hands are tied because they are guests on your show. Another pause. You call it power. I call it pathetic. That was the last straw. Joy sprang up from her chair, her face contorted with rage. Pathetic? How dare you? I've been a professional interviewer for years. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders. And how many of them left feeling respected? Eastwood interrupted, his gaze locked on her. The question seemed to echo in the silence. How many of them left feeling like they'd had an actual conversation rather than a setup? Joy stammered for a second before rallying. I am not going to sit here and take this. You're right, Eastwood agreed coolly. You don't have to. He looked at her for another moment before adding, just as I don't have to stand here and allow you to turn this into your personal political rally. Whoopi, sensing that things were rapidly spiraling out of control, quickly tried to intervene. Clint, Joy, why don't we all just take a moment to... No, Eastwood said as he stood up slowly. I think we've established exactly what our respective positions are. He began walking away, but Joy's voice rang out. You can't just leave because you don't like being asked questions. Eastwood paused and looked back at her, that familiar glint in his eye. Watch me. His voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute finality. I came here as a courtesy to promote a film I believe in, not to be turned into a target. It's live television, Joy shouted after him. You can't just walk off set. A moment of hesitation before he retorted, Can't I? He was already reaching for his mic. With one last glance at her, he continued, The greatest show of power is to know when to walk away. The statement hung in the air, so profound that it silenced the entire room. If you leave now, it'll look like you can't handle tough questions. Joy pressed in a last-ditch effort to get him to stay. For a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Eastwood turned his back on her and faced the camera directly. People watching at home, he said, his voice calm and steady. I came here today to talk about a film that's important to me. Unfortunately, I had to endure something else. He paused. Draw your own conclusions. The audience was completely silent. Eastwood looked back at Joy and said, As for tough questions, I've answered them my whole life. A slight nod. I just didn't realize they came from people who call themselves professionals anymore. The tension finally broke, and Joy's voice rose to a fever pitch. You arrogant has-been! You think you can come on my show and insult me? The words echoed around the room. Nobody moved. The hosts looked shell-shocked, and the camera crew stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Eastwood turned back to face her, his face serene and calm. Has been, he repeated softly. The pause was long and potent, and everyone in the room knew that this was more than just an interview now. It was a defining moment, and they would remember it forever. Sometimes, the greatest statement we can make is to say, enough, and walk away. Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. Joy leans in, her voice sharp against the hushed silence. How funny. From a guy whose most famous accomplishment is sitting at a table talking about other people's achievements. It hits like a thunderclap. The studio freezes. The silence that follows is palpable, an all-encompassing void where no one dares to speak or even breathe. Eastwood doesn't flinch. No flash of anger, no raised voice, just a stony stillness. Then, slowly, has been, he repeats. The word, a gravelly murmur. A beat of silence. Joy. He continues, his voice quiet but firm. I've been called a lot of things in my career. His eyes meet hers. But it was usually by people who had done something with their own damn lives. That one stings. Her face registers the blow. For a split second, she looks like she might retreat. But pride is a relentless force, pushing people forward when they should be stepping back. I've accomplished enough, thank you very much, Joy retorts, her voice strained. Have you? Eastwood asks, his quiet query resonating with more power than any shout. He continues, let's take a look. How many of your guests have you insulted over the years? How many discussions have you transformed into shouting matches? How many potentially meaningful conversations have been reduced to noise? Joy tries to maintain her composure. I ask the hard questions. No, Eastwood corrects, his tone steady. You ask the questions that get ratings. There's a difference between journalism and performance, and you've long forgotten which one you're supposed to be doing. Even the co-hosts can't conceal their unease. Whoopi interjects, Clint, perhaps we can reset. Joy, why don't we apologize and get back to the film? For a moment, it seems like a path back to normalcy. But Joy pivots sharply. Apologize? For what? For doing my job? Your job, Eastwood interrupts, is to inform and engage, not to tear people down for sport. You weren't attacking me. You were performing. Eastwood lets out a short, dry laugh. Ma'am, I've been in real battles. I know what an attack looks like, but when people came after me, they didn't hide behind a format. The air crackles with tension, the room now fractured. Other hosts avoid eye contact. Even the audience squirms. Joy, her voice starting to shake, pushes on. You think you're so tough? Let me make this clear. This is my show, my rules. If you don't like the questions, get out. Eastwood smiles, a cold, controlled expression. Your house, your rules. You're right. He stands. The dynamic shifts entirely. In your house, he continues, guests are cornered. Disagreement becomes disrespect. Drama trumps understanding. Congratulations on your creation. Joy, near tears, hisses, if you think you can walk in here and lecture me about television. I'm not lecturing you about television, Eastwood states calmly. I'm pointing out that what you're doing isn't television. It's a circus, and you're leading it. A collective gasp from the audience. Even for live TV, this is extraordinary. How dare you, Joy shouts, losing all composure. You come on my show and insult me. Your show? Eastwood glances at the panel. I thought this was a discussion. Apparently it's something else. Whoopi steps in firmly. That's enough. Joy, you need to calm down. The point of no return has passed. Don't tell me to calm down! Joy snaps. He walks in here acting superior and disrespects me. Silence. Eastwood speaks softly. The only one who has shown disrespect is you. From the moment I sat down, you weren't interested in a conversation. You were looking for a fight. It all becomes clear in that moment. This wasn't about the film or the questions. It was about control, ego, and who would have the last word. But here's the real question. When the cameras are rolling and the pressure is immense, who truly wins? The one who shouts the loudest, or the one who knows exactly when to stand up and walk away? I was doing my job, Joy repeated. But this time, it lacked the same conviction. The words felt hollow, wobbly, and everyone in the room heard it. Eastwood shook his head slowly. No, he stated plainly. Your job would be about the craft, the work, the process, maybe even the ideas that are remotely related to why I am here. He gave a calm nod toward the cameras. Your job would be about making people feel as though they have learned something, or at least something worthwhile. A pause. You have instead spent the last 20 minutes trying to trap a guest. Another beat. And what you've accomplished is only to lay your own show bare. That last comment lingered in the air. Joy looked about, seeking reinforcement, and there was none. The other hosts turned away. The crowd was silent. The electricity of the studio no longer a friend to Joy. Even the crew shifted nervously. Fine, she finally blurted, her voice cracking with the strain. If you can't answer meaningful questions, maybe interviews aren't for you. Eastwood, in the process of unhooking his mic, stopped. He turned back and, one last time, met the issue head-on. Meaningful questions? He inquired. He then faced the camera directly. Let me define meaningful for you. The room seemed to hold its breath. A meaningful question is, after all these years, what still fuels your passion? A pause. A meaningful question is, what advice would you give to a young person trying to enter the industry? Another beat. A meaningful question is, what is the story that touched you the most? And tell us why. He then turned back to Joy. But meaningful questions require something else, he said quietly. Meaningful questions require you to care about the answer. Silence. Deep, unending silence. We both know, he added, that this was never about that. For the first time in the broadcast, Joy was silent. No interruption, no retorts, only a stark stillness. Do you know what is the truly saddest thing? Eastwood continued, his voice now quieter, yet more resonant. You had the chance to engage in an actual conversation with someone who has spent a lifetime in this business, and you squandered it for noise. He completely removed the mic and placed it gently on the desk. That is not just a waste of my time, he said. It is a waste of their time. He nodded at the audience. They deserve better. This remark seemed to sting, and Joy quickly regained her voice, though it was now higher, less in control. Don't lecture me about my audience. I have been communicating with people for decades. Have you? Eastwood countered, adjusting his jacket. Or have you just been talking at them? Because there is a significant difference between communicating and producing mere noise. In the wings, producers were already flurrying, exchanging rapid signals, hushed instructions, a palpable sense that the train had irrevocably derailed. Security! Joy suddenly shrieked, her desperation palpable. Get security! And for the first time, Eastwood laughed, a real hearty laugh. Security? What are they going to do? Hold me here. He surveyed the studio one last time, taking in the slack-jawed faces, the stunned silence, the weight of the moment. I've been doing this for over 60 years, he stated calmly. I have worked with some of the greatest people in this business, and in all that time, I have never witnessed something quite like this. Is that meant to be a compliment? Joy stammered, weak. Take it as you will, he replied smoothly. Then the final remark, the sentence that delivered the coup de grace. People are not going to be talking about your tough questions tomorrow. A beat. They will be talking about this. Another pause. How it imploded. And without further ado, he turned and walked out. No hurried stride, no fluster, just quiet conviction. The doors of the studio closed behind him, leaving a vast emptiness in its wake. Joy remained frozen, face burning with humiliation and anger. The other hosts said nothing. The crowd sat frozen, transfixed. Because everyone in that room understood. They had just witnessed history. Not an interview, not a discussion, but a watershed moment. A television show designed to highlight an individual had instead evolved into one of the most raw, explosive public encounters in its history. And Clint Eastwood? He never raised his voice. He never faltered. He did not stay. He simply walked away, allowing the subsequent silence to speak volumes. So, the question remains. When the cameras are off, the crowds are gone, and the studio has fallen quiet. Who, really, has won? If this story surprised you, be sure to stay for more electrifying encounters like these. And tell me in the comments below, did this confrontation go too far, or was it inevitable?